All right, so let's jump right into U.S.-Jamaica relations. We're going to take a deep dive into this meeting between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Jamaica's Prime Minister Andrew Holness. It happened on February 19th, 2025, and we've got all sorts of stuff to look at. We've got government statements, economic analyses, even some public reactions. We really want to figure out not just what they talked about, but what it means for both countries, and especially what it means for you, as someone interested in mention listener-specific area of interest, usually Caribbean economics, international relations, etc.
Yeah, the thing that jumped out at me right away was the really positive tone from both sides. They called it a good chat. They called it a strong partnership. They really emphasized all this shared history and cultural stuff. And it makes you wonder, right? Is there more to it than just being polite?
Right. It's not just like diplomatic politeness, right?
Right.
There's got to be some strategy at play here when both sides are like, being so friendly. So let's break it down. What were some of the main things they focused on?
Well, security was a big one. Both countries are really worried about organized crime and, of course, the trafficking, the illicit trafficking. So they agreed to work closer together on intelligence sharing and law enforcement. That could mean a lot more resources going towards those issues, potentially.
Yeah, that's huge, especially for anyone listening who's following mention listeners' specific area of interest. That kind of cooperation, I mean, it could really have a big impact in all sorts of areas. Now, I know they also talked a lot about the economics, right?
Oh, absolutely. The U.S. made some pretty big commitments to investing in Jamaica's economic growth, particularly in commerce, infrastructure, and something they called nearshore digital technology hubs.
Nearshore digital technology hubs. What in the world is that? Can you, explain that a bit? What does that even mean for Jamaica?
So basically, Jamaica's really close to the U.S., right? And they've got an English-speaking workforce. So the idea is that Jamaica could be a great place for tech companies that want to be closer to their North American customers. It's kind of a strategic move to, get more foreign investment and boost Jamaica's tech sector.
That's a big deal. But it makes you wonder, right? Is this good for everyone? Or is there a risk? Like, could Jamaica become too reliant on the U.S.?
It's a good question. I mean, there's always that balance, right? You want foreign investment, but you don't want to lose control of your own economy. It really depends on how these initiatives are done and what kind of protections are put in place for Jamaica. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of potential for growth and jobs too.
So let's get into the specifics. What were some of the things they talked about in terms of economics?
Well, tax reform was a big one. They talked about encouraging businesses to bring their profits back to Jamaica, maybe consolidating payroll taxes, and maybe even raising the general consumption tax threshold for small businesses. Basically, they want to make it easier for businesses to grow and make the tax system a little less complicated.
So it sounds like they are trying to ease the pressure on those small businesses, get more investment from outside, and encourage people to invest inside Jamaica. It's a pretty multifaceted approach. What else did they discuss?
They also talked about developing urban centers, focusing on Morant Bay and Bound Brook. And they mentioned this urban renewal tax credit, which is supposed to get private companies to invest in those areas. The goal is to update infrastructure and attract businesses.
Interesting. So we've got tax reform, we've got urban development. Sounds like they really want to make it easier to do business in Jamaica. Did they talk at all about investment or the stock market?
Yeah, they did. They talked about maybe giving businesses some incentives to modernize and invest in new technology, to help them be more competitive globally. And they even talked about maybe reducing the dividend tax rate and having the government sell some of its shares in Trans-Jamaican Highway, through a public offering.
And so they are looking at the stock market too.
Yeah,
This is all pretty exciting from an economic standpoint.
yeah.
But we know Jamaica depends a lot on tourism, right? Did they talk about that at all?
They did. They talked about strengthening the connection between agriculture and tourism. Get those hotels and resorts, buying more local produce. So it's a win-win. Help out the farmers and give tourists a more authentic Jamaican experience. They even talked about things like the Agri-Linkages Exchange Platform, or ALX. That connects farmers directly with the people buying for the tourism industry.
Oh, I love that idea. Helping local farmers, reducing reliance on imports, and giving tourists a more authentic taste of Jamaica. So sustainable and delicious, too. Out of all these initiatives, which one seems the most promising to you? What could really change things for Jamaica?
It's tough to pick just one, but those nearshore digital technology hubs, they really stand out to me. If Jamaica can really become a regional tech center, I think that could lead to a lot of economic growth and a lot of jobs.
Yeah, I think that has the potential to be a big game changer. Now, the U.S. also said they would continue to help Jamaica recover from the pandemic, especially with programs for at-risk youth. It seems like they're trying to address, both the economic and social effects.
Right. They talked about programs to prevent crime and develop human capital, especially among young people. It raises an interesting question. How does this fit into the relationship between the U.S. and Jamaica? Is this just aid, or does the U.S. have a strategic interest here?
That's a really good question. It seems like genuine help, but you always have to think about the bigger picture. What does the U.S. want in the region long term, and do these programs fit into that?
Yeah, it's a complicated situation. We need to think about both the good intentions and the possible unintended consequences.
So we've talked about security, all these economic initiatives, and helping young people after the pandemic.
Yeah.
What about climate change? Jamaica's an island nation. It's really vulnerable. Was that part of the conversation?
Absolutely. Both sides said they were worried about climate change and wanted to work together on renewable energy projects and strategies to make Jamaica more resilient. That goes hand in hand with what they were talking about with energy, right? It seems like they're thinking more about sustainable development.
That's good to hear. And it makes sense for both of them to work together. For Jamaica, it's about protecting its environment. But for the U.S., it's a chance to, promote clean energy and strengthen its relationship with a partner in the region.
Yeah, it's a clear example of where their interests align. But, we can't talk about the U.S. and Jamaica without talking about immigration. It's a sensitive topic, especially with Secretary Rubio's views on controlling migration and repatriation.
Right. They talk about partnership and all this collaboration, but there's definitely tension when it comes to immigration. A lot of Jamaicans have family in the U.S., so things like stricter enforcement or changes in repatriation, they can be really scary.
Definitely. It's important to remember the human side of this. These policies had a real impact on people's lives and families.
So let's take a step back. We've got this positive atmosphere, promises of economic growth, but then also these areas of potential concern. But before we talk about how Jamaicans are reacting to all of this, let's summarize what we've learned so far.
Well, I think we can say that this meeting was important for a lot of reasons. We saw real agreements, some ambitious plans, and, an atmosphere of collaboration. It seems like things between the U.S. and Jamaica are getting closer. But like with any relationship, there are some underlying issues and potential problems to keep in mind.
Well put. For our listener, I think the main takeaway is that international relations are complicated. There are so many different points of view, different interests, and lots of factors to consider. It's not about picking a side, it's about understanding all the complexity.
Exactly. You have to look beyond the surface and really think about what's going on.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and explore how Jamaicans are feeling about all this. What are their hopes and concerns as their relationship with the U.S. continues to evolve?
It's important to remember that not everyone in Jamaica feels the same way about this meeting. We saw some pretty mixed reactions in our sources. It's kind of a mixed bag.
That's understandable. I mean, there are potential benefits, right? Economic growth, better security. But there are also concerns about the U.S. having too much influence, especially with things like immigration. It's a lot to weigh.
Exactly. Some people are optimistic. They see this as a chance for a better economy, more jobs, and, maybe a safer environment. They're proud that Jamaica's getting this attention on the world stage.
Yeah, those economic initiatives are pretty exciting. But there's that worry, right? Could Jamaica become too dependent on the U.S.? It's a tough balance.
Absolutely. And that's where some of the anxiety comes in. People worry about relying too much on U.S. policies, especially policies that might not actually be good for Jamaica.
And those concerns about immigration policies are real. I mean, for Jamaicans with family in the U.S., any talk about stricter enforcement or changes in repatriation is scary.
Yeah, you can't forget about that human side of things. These policies affect real people, families, their whole future.
So how do you reconcile those two sides? How can Jamaica get closer to the U.S. without giving up too much control or becoming too reliant?
That's the big question. It's going to take a lot of careful thought and strategy. Jamaica needs to take advantage of the opportunities, especially for the economy and security, but not at the cost of its independence.
So being smart about it, right?
Yeah.
Choosing which parts to say yes to and maybe pushing back on things that aren't good for Jamaica.
Exactly. They need to make sure Jamaican voices are heard and that everyone benefits fairly from this partnership.
So if you were advising the Jamaican government, what would be your top priority in this relationship? How would you make sure Jamaica gets the most out of it without being taken advantage of?
I think the most important thing is for Jamaica to invest in itself. Focus on education, job training, infrastructure, build a stronger, more diverse economy that's not so reliant on any one country.
So not just taking money from the U.S., but creating an environment where Jamaican businesses can succeed on their own.
Right. And the second thing is transparency. Everything with the U.S. needs to be out in the open. Agreements should be negotiated publicly with input from all sorts of people, not just the government. That builds trust.
And it protects Jamaica from, any shady deals or hidden agendas.
Exactly. Openness is key to a healthy relationship. And finally, Jamaica needs to stay focused on its own interests. Don't be afraid to say no to things that aren't good for Jamaica, even if there are big incentives. It's about protecting their sovereignty, making sure this partnership really benefits the Jamaican people.
That takes guts,
Yeah.
standing up to a superpower like the U.S. But it's important for a relationship that's truly equal.
It is. Jamaica has its own unique strengths and values, and those need to be respected in any partnership.
So a lot for Jamaica to think about as it navigates this relationship. But what about our listener, the one who's interested in mentioned listener-specific area of interest? What should they be paying attention to?
Well, the first thing to remember is that international relations are messy. There are always different sides to the story, different interests, and potential consequences to consider. It's not about picking sides, it's about understanding how complicated it all is.
It's about thinking critically and not just believing everything you hear.
Right. The second thing is to remember that these high-level meetings and agreements affect real people. Whether it's immigration policies, job opportunities, or safety concerns, these decisions impact people's lives.
It's not just some abstract political game. It's about real people and their families and their future.
Exactly. And lastly, remember that knowledge is power. The more you know about these things, the better equipped you are to understand them. You can form your own opinions, advocate for change, and hold your leaders accountable.
Don't just sit back and watch. Be an informed, engaged citizen. Your voice matters.
It really does. That's something we should all strive for, no matter where we live or what our interests are.
Well said. Now, before we move on from this deep dive into U.S.-Jamaica relations, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. If you were advising the Jamaican government, what would be your top priority in this relationship? What steps would you take to make sure it benefits Jamaica while protecting its independence and interests?
That's a great question to think about. And there's no easy answer. It takes careful consideration, understanding the issues, and being willing to have open and honest conversations.
And that's what we've tried to do in this deep dive, to give you the context, the insights, and the different perspectives you need to draw your own conclusions.
Because at the end of the day, it's up to each of us to engage with these issues, ask the tough questions, and demand better from our leaders. It really makes you think, you know?
Oh,
There's just so much to consider when you look closely at how countries interact with each other. And that's kind of the whole point of this deep dive, right?
it's about going beyond those, quick headlines. We want to give you the tools to really understand these complicated issues so you can, form your own opinions and maybe even have some interesting conversations.
It's not enough to just know what's happening.
Right. You have to dig deeper, figure out why it matters in the first place.
Think about what could happen as a result.
How it all fits into, the big picture. Sometimes that means questioning what you believe.
Confronting your own biases, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, sometimes you have to sit with that discomfort and, really grapple with the complexity of it all.
But that's how we learn and grow.
It's in those moments when we're like, wait a minute, that we can really expand our understanding and become more, active and engaged citizens.
And that's so important. When people are informed, they can really make a difference.
So keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep.
Right. Absolutely. Until next time.
Well, this has been a fascinating look at U.S.-Jamaica relations. We've covered so much ground, from security and the economy to youth programs, climate change, and immigration. It's clear that this relationship is full of possibilities, but also potential challenges.
It's been a pleasure talking all this through with you.
Likewise. Now, before we wrap up, we want to encourage everyone listening to do their own research. Keep exploring. We'll be sharing some links in the show notes to articles about U.S. foreign policy, Jamaica's economic plans, and even some really interesting stuff about the history between the two countries.
Yeah, definitely check those out. You might be surprised by what you learn. And who knows, maybe this will inspire you to keep digging deeper into international relations and how they affect all of us.
Because understanding how the world works is crucial, especially now, when everything feels so connected.
And hopefully, we can all work together to create partnerships that are fair and beneficial for everyone involved.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Meet Jason, a small business owner from Kingston. He's having sleepless nights because his newly opened shop is struggling to make sales. Let's meet Kim, a small store owner from Montego Bay. Since purchasing her AI phone agent from AILX, her happy customers are being serviced 24/7 with AILX's AI phone agent solution. Give your customers the customer service they deserve with AI phone agents. The future is now.